It was Alani Mary's first day at Murphy Holdings. The morning air in Manhattan was crisp, with a lazy October sun casting soft light across the towering skyline. Dressed in a sleek black pencil skirt, white blouse, and a second-hand wool blazer that didn't quite hide its age, Alani stood outside the revolving doors of the glass-clad skyscraper. She exhaled slowly. She'd made it. After months of job hunting, side gigs, and late-night prayers whispered while holding her mother's worn rosary, she'd finally landed a full-time administrative position at one of the most potent investment firms on the East Coast. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it paid just enough to help with her mother's medication. Inside, the lobby gleamed like something out of a movie. Gold elevators, polished floors, a receptionist with perfect posture, and a headset that looked more expensive than Alani's outfit. Her heels clicked nervously across the marble tiles as she approached the elevator bay. There were two options: a row of regular elevators on the left, and one sleek, mirrored elevator standing alone on the right. The solitary one had no floor buttons on the outside. It simply shimmered beneath a soft blue light, its doors sealed like a vault. "Must be for upper management," Alani muttered. But as she reached for the button on the left, the mirrored elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Empty. No one in sight. No security card swipes. No warning. She hesitated. Maybe, just this once. She stepped inside. The doors closed. The air inside was oddly scented. Sharp citrus and cedarwood. Clean but commanding. The panel had no numbers, only a small screen flashing. Penthouse. Authorized access only. Oh no. Too late. The elevator had already begun to rise. Alani's heart pounded. Her palms grew slick. Her mind flashed through worst-case scenarios. Being fired on the spot, escorted out by security, having her badge revoked before it was even activated. She was so caught up in her internal spiral that she didn't hear the ding announcing the arrival. When the doors opened, the first thing she saw was him. A tall man stood just outside, his dark navy suit cut to perfection, shirt collar crisp, a Cartier watch peeking beneath his cuff. He was all edges, sharp jawline, sharper gaze. Icy blue eyes narrowed the moment they landed on her. He didn't speak. Neither did she. For a moment, time pressed pause. Alani scrambled for an explanation, but her voice didn't cooperate. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. This wasn't. He said you took the executive elevator. His voice smooth as bourbon but colder than winter rain, without clearance. I didn't know it was restricted. The door just opened. He tilted his head slightly. Something flickered in his gaze. Amusement? Curiosity? Or just disbelief that someone like her had wandered into his airspace? And you thought it was a good idea to step inside anyway? Alani's pride bristled, but she kept her voice even. I was trying to get to my department. It's my first day. Name, Alani Mary. He stared at her, not in a leering way. No, this man didn't need to leer. He had the kind of presence that filled a room with silent authority. He observed her like a puzzle. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. A woman in stilettos and a red pencil skirt came rushing out of a nearby office. "Mr. Murphy, your 9 a.m. Postpone it," he said coolly, "and tell HR I want Alani Mary's full file on my desk. Immediately." Alani's breath caught. Mr. Murphy? Was that Isaac Murphy? The elusive CEO, the youngest billionaire in the city, the man who built an empire before 35 and avoided public attention like the plague. and she just walked into his private elevator like a fool. She stepped out slowly, eyes wide. The red-skirted woman gave her a once-over. "You're braver than you look." "I didn't mean to." The woman smirked. "No one means to. And yet, no one except you ever makes it out without a warning." Alani blinked. "What do you mean?" She only shrugged. "Let's say you caught his attention. That's not easy to do. Do you believe in fate? Or just terrible elevator timing?" If this first encounter between Alani and Isaac intrigued you, imagine what's waiting in the following chapters. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, comment with your favorite moment, and follow the channel so you won't miss what happens next. Something tells us this was only the beginning. The HR department at Murphy Holdings operated like a high-functioning war room. Nothing went unnoticed, and no request was ever delayed, especially when it came from the top. So when Isaac Murphy's assistant forwarded a terse message with only 4 words, "Full file, Alani Mary," the wheels turned fast. Within 30 minutes, Alani's entire dossier, academic transcripts, former employment, emergency contacts, even her internship references, sat neatly compiled in a leather-bound folder on the CEO's mahogany desk. Isaac didn't open it immediately. He stared at the name embossed on the tab, Alani Mary. It lingered in his mind like a note that refused to fade. She had seemed ordinary at first glance. No luxury perfume, no designer heels. Her blazer had a frayed seam near the collar. He noticed that sort of thing. And yet, when she stood in his elevator, wide-eyed but composed, apologetic yet unapologetically dignified, something about her had snagged a thread in his memory. He didn't like loose threads. "Sir," came the soft knock of Eleanor, his executive assistant. "Do you want me to follow up with HR?" He looked up. "No, that'll be all." Once again, he opened the folder. She was 28, graduate of a state university. No prior experience in finance, but glowing recommendations from previous supervisors. One called her disciplined, relentlessly positive, and impossible not to trust. Another had scribbled, "If I could have afforded to keep her, I would have." His eyes paused at the emergency contact line. Mrs. Renee Mary. Mother. Adoptive. A soft hum stirred in his chest, one he hadn't felt in years. Not since the fire. Not since he was a boy named Isaac, who had no last name and used to wait for anyone to choose him. He leaned back in his chair and closed the folder. He didn't believe in coincidences. Down on the 17th floor, Alani was still trying to find her breath. Her cubicle was small, barely enough for a desk and a filing cabinet, but it was a corner office to her. She kept her hands busy, organizing folders, color-coding spreadsheets, replying to internal memos, anything to stop thinking about him. Isaac Murphy. He had the power that made other men adjust their ties around him. And she had walked straight into his elevator like a lost intern. Worse, she couldn't read him. He wasn't rude, but there was an edge beneath his civility, like a man who knew too much about people to believe in them fully. At noon, she received a memo from HR. "Ms. Mary, please report to the CEO's office on the 48th floor at 12:15 p.m. Her heart dropped into her shoes. Not even a full workday. She was going to be fired. She glanced at her reflection in the dark screen of her computer. Eyes too wide, lips pressed too tightly together. She smoothed her curls into a bun, applied balm, and stood. The 48th floor was like another planet. Silence hummed like electricity. Every surface glowed. Glass, steel, light oak. Assistants crept, like ghosts in tailored suits. "Mr. Murphy will see you now," said a soft-voiced assistant. When Alani stepped inside his office, she half expected coldness and dismissal. But Isaac wasn't at his desk. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking over the city as if it belonged to him. In a way, it did. "Sit," he said without turning. She obeyed. He finally turned. His eyes were unreadable again. "Do you know why you're here?" She cleared her throat. "I assume it's about the elevator. I want to apologize again, Mr. Murphy." "It's not about that." She blinked. "It's not? You're being reassigned." Alani's breath caught. Reassigned. He returned to his desk and sat across from her, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Effective immediately, you will serve as my executive secretary. The position comes with a salary increase, non-disclosure terms, and the expectation that you'll be available outside standard hours when necessary. I don't understand. I don't expect you to, but I've reviewed your background. You're capable, quiet, loyal, and I need someone who won't ask too many questions." Alani's mind whirled. Why me? He hesitated. For a moment, she thought he might give her an honest answer. But instead he only said, "Because I don't want my personal life becoming public. I'm in a situation. I need a secretary who understands discretion." Alani leaned forward slightly, searching his face. "This isn't just a job." "No," he replied. "It's a test. I don't expect you to pass unless you're stronger than you look." Her spine straightened. "Then I'll have to surprise you." Isaac smiled. Not a full smile, but the kind that hinted at it. "We'll see." When she left his office, the city below was awash in golden afternoon light. The same elevator awaited her, silent, waiting, mirrored. This time, when the doors opened, she didn't hesitate. She stepped inside like she belonged. Alani stood before her new office, if one could even call it that. It wasn't hers, more of an annex tucked just outside Isaac Murphy's glass fortress on the top floor. It held a minimalist desk, a phone that never stopped blinking, a laptop linked to his private calendar, and a window with a view she tried not to be distracted by. Across the glass wall, his silhouette moved with an almost unnatural stillness. Isaac didn't fidget. He didn't lean. He didn't blink more than necessary. He worked the way kings must have once sat on thrones, still, watchful, unreachable. She hadn't seen him since their brief conversation 2 days ago. But she felt him, not just through the constant updates from his assistant, not just how the building buzzed when he entered, or how executives straightened their spines when he passed. She felt him like a low hum beneath the skin. And when her phone finally rang that morning with his line blinking, her fingers curled around the receiver with the kind of tension that came from being pulled into something far too big and fast. "Ms. Mary," his voice filtered through, precise and smooth. "I'll need you in my office. Now." His office smelled faintly of bergamot and leather, crisp, clean, intimidating. He didn't look up as she entered, closed the door. She obeyed, and the soft click of the latch felt louder than it should have. He gestured to the chair across from his. "Sit." Alani took the seat, smoothing the fabric of her navy skirt, trying to ignore how the leather armrests felt like restraints. Isaac leaned back. His gaze didn't rest on her face so much as read it. "There's something we need to clarify," he began. "This position. It is, as I mentioned, not only professional." Alani's fingers stilled on her lap. "You said you needed discretion because your situation was complicated." He nodded once. "My grandfather is ill. He's also deeply traditional. and he believes that I must settle down to inherit full controlling shares of Murphy Holdings. Mary. Alani blinked. You're getting married? I already have. Silence. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Isaac reached into the drawer and produced a crisp, formal, legal document. Marriage certificate. Her name was printed there, beside his. Her heart stopped. I don't understand. You signed employment documents when you joined, he said calmly. One of them included a non-disclosure agreement and a clause that allowed for flexible contractual additions. The marriage license was submitted as part of a sealed family arrangement under legal counsel. You signed your part when you accepted the job. That's... She stood. That's wild. Perhaps, he said, but effective. Alani's chest rose and fell with restrained fury. Why me? Isaac stood slowly, as if rising to her height for the first time. Because you're forgettable in a way that makes you valuable. No social media. No drama. You don't chase power, and you don't attract gossip. And because when you stepped into that elevator, something told me you wouldn't crumble. Her voice was low now. So you chose me to be your placeholder wife? For 1 year, he said, until my grandfather's succession terms are complete. After that, we'll annul quietly. You'll be well compensated. This is a transaction for you. Everything is a transaction, he replied, even kindness. Alani's jaw tightened. And what if I say no now? He didn't flinch. Then you'll be released from your position. Discreetly. Severance. A strong reference. And the legal machine will make sure this never surfaces. You'll return to your life, your quiet apartment, your unpaid bills, your mother's prescriptions. And this will all become a blurry what if. She felt the slap without its sound. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. It wasn't cruelty. It was precision. He had already mapped out every angle of her resistance and laid out his strategy like a chess master. She sat back down. Slowly. What's the catch? No emotional involvement. No public exposure. You'll accompany me to key events, play your part convincingly, and keep your distance the rest of the time. You'll be compensated monthly, plus a final sum upon annulment. A bonus if no complications arise. And what's a complication, Mr. Murphy? His gaze was unwavering. You're falling in love with me. Or worse, me falling in love with you. Alani laughed, bitter and breathless. That won't be a problem. Good. He extended the amended contract across the desk. Then, we understand each other. She stared at the document. Her name was printed beside his again. She signed, with hands steady, with eyes that did not blink. Not because she trusted him, not because she agreed, but because a voice inside whispered, "This is how your life changes, not with fireworks, but with a pen." Isaac took the contract back, filed it without ceremony, and finally looked up at her, not as a CEO, but as a man who had just sealed a vow with a stranger. "One more thing," he said. "What?" "From now on, you'll wear this." He opened a black velvet box. Inside was a platinum band, simple and cold. A ring. A symbol. A chain. Alani took it without a word. When she slipped it onto her finger, it fit perfectly, just like the lie they were about to live. The ring was heavier than it looked. Alani had worn jewelry before, simple, everyday pieces from street fairs or gifts from her mother, but never something that came with weight beyond metal. This wasn't just platinum and polish. This was silence, spectacle, sacrifice. It gleamed on her finger like a secret. That night, she stood before her modest bathroom mirror, light flickering softly overhead. Her apartment smelled faintly of lavender and rain, the scent of a cheap candle she always burned before bed. She turned her hand in the light and watched the diamond catch it, as if it had something to say. Her name, Alani Mary Murphy, now existed on paper, on record. And yet, nothing about her life felt like hers. The marriage was legal. The promises were not. No wedding, no kiss, no cake, just cold signatures and corporate necessity. And him, Isaac Murphy, with his untouched ties and untouched heart. She still couldn't tell what he felt, if anything. That man could deliver a contract that altered a life without shifting in his seat. But the following morning, the first rule of their arrangement revealed itself in the form of a calendar invite titled Annual Murphy Gala, Attendance Mandatory, Black Tie, Media Presence. The CEO's spouse is expected. She stared at the screen and sighed. So it begins. The gala was held at the Astoria Hall downtown, a restored ballroom that whispered old money through every golden arch and velvet-draped corridor. The chandelier in the center could crush a city car if it fell, and every corner gleamed with calculated opulence. Alani had never worn a dress that cost more than her rent, but tonight she stood in front of the full-length mirror in Isaac's private penthouse, draped in a black silk gown that fit like sin. The stylist had worked for hours, hair pinned in soft waves, lips painted deep plum, skin glowing like the evening sky. She barely recognized herself. "Let's get this over with," she murmured. Isaac appeared in the doorway, adjusting his cufflinks. A tuxedo sat on him like it had been born with him. He paused when he saw her. His gaze, usually unreadable, flickered. Then he cleared his throat. "You look appropriate. Is that billionaire speak for beautiful?" A brief, reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Don't push your luck." She smirked, even as nerves pricked her spine. "Do I need to memorize a script for tonight?" "No. Just smile. Don't contradict me. And if anyone asks, we've been married for 6 months. Quiet ceremony in upstate New York. Family only. And if they ask why there are no photos?" He buttoned his jacket. "We don't share our private lives. You'll find people rarely push once you stop explaining." He offered his arm. She hesitated. Then, silently, she slipped her hand around it. It was warm, steady. She told herself it meant nothing. The ballroom pulsed with low music and high expectations. Every corner held legacy, heirs of tech empires, daughters of oil magnates, senators, supermodels. Cameras flashed like polite gunfire. But when Isaac and Alani descended the grand staircase, silence wrapped the room for a beat too long. All eyes were on them. Her skin prickled under its weight. She smiled, not too wide or forced, and let Isaac guide her through the gauntlet. Introductions were made, polite laughter. Champagne flutes clinked in orchestrated toasts. Some women blinked twice when Alani was introduced as Mrs. Murphy. Some smiled too sweetly. Some narrowed their eyes as if trying to solve a riddle. But none dared speak it aloud. "She doesn't look like someone who belongs here." Isaac never left her side. His hand remained at the small of her back, a constant point of contact. Possessive, but polite. A gesture of ownership dressed up as affection. Once, when a French heiress with 2 red lips leaned in too closely and asked, "Where did he find you?" Isaac's grip tightened. "Alani," he said, eyes cold, "runs circles around most people in this room. Present company included." The woman flinched. "I only meant, I know what you meant." He moved on without looking back. Later, as they stood near the ballroom's edge with a glass of something golden in hand, Alani turned to him. "You didn't have to defend me." He kept his gaze forward. "I didn't. You called me smart. You don't even know me. Isaac finally looked at her. That's where you're wrong. She held his gaze. Then tell me something about me. You're calculating but kind. You notice things no one else sees. Like when Eleanor forgot her earring yesterday, and you left it on her keyboard. You dress modestly, but never hide. You're afraid of heights, but not of people. And you walk like someone who's had to rebuild their life more than once. Silence. For a long time. When Alani finally spoke, her voice was softer. Why me, Isaac? He sipped his drink, then said, because I needed someone who would understand the value of a lie and the danger of truth. And with that, he walked away, leaving her in a room full of gold, secrets, and the ghost of something unspoken. The Monday after the gala arrived quietly. Too quietly. Murphy Holdings was never loud in the traditional sense, but the silence held a new weight today. One that settled in corners, traveled down hallways, and tightened around Alani's shoulders when she stepped off the elevator. They knew. Not everyone, but enough. Her new title. Mrs. Murphy had made its uninvited debut that night, and whispers moved faster than corporate memos. Some tried to be subtle, lingering glances over coffee, questions masked in small talk. Others were bolder, raised brows in the break room, side comments with just enough sugar to cover the acid beneath. So, Mrs. Murphy, one intern said too brightly, is it true you and the boss eloped in Vermont? Or was it Aspen? Alani smiled tightly. That's private. Oh, of course. The girl leaned in. Just between us, though. Did you ever imagine you'd end up with him? Alani didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was enough for the rumors to grow teeth. By noon, she stopped correcting anyone. By 2, she stopped hearing them altogether. She focused on her work, briefing memos, scheduling Isaac's meetings, handling call overflow, and flagging board reports with quiet efficiency. But inside her chest, something twisted. Not because of the marriage. That was already a weight she'd agreed to carry. It was the assumptions. That she was after his money. That she had seduced him. That she was a woman out of place. And Isaac, for his part, offered no public acknowledgement. No words of confirmation or denial. He merely existed, as he always had. Above the noise, untouched by the emotional fallout of decisions he engineered with surgical precision. Later that afternoon, the tension finally cracked. He summoned her to his office around 3. Not unusual. What was unusual was the way he looked when she entered. Still in his tailored suit, still impossibly composed. His posture was taut, his jaw sharper than usual. He didn't ask her to sit. Close the door. She did. Quietly. He turned to face her, arms crossed. You've been the subject of office gossip. I noticed. You didn't tell me. Alani blinked. Is this a warning? No. His voice softened. It's an observation. One I should have anticipated. She tilted her head. You expected me to report every snide comment about being your wife? Isaac's eyes held hers. I expected you to tell me if this was more than you could handle. It's not. But it could be. She exhaled through her nose, crossing her arms to match him. Let me be clear. I didn't walk into this arrangement thinking I'd be adored. But I also didn't expect to be invisible. He frowned. You're not invisible. Then why is it so easy for you to pretend this isn't affecting me? The question hung in the air between them, delicate and sharp. Isaac didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than she expected. Because I've spent years mastering the art of not reacting. It's how I survive. And I assumed you knew how to do the same. Alani's throat tightened. I don't want to survive, Isaac. I want to exist without being judged for where I stand, or who I stand beside. His gaze didn't falter. Then stand beside me. Publicly. What? You and I. This marriage. It was meant to be clean, controlled, temporary. But the narrative's out. We either ignore it and let them chew it apart, or we control the next move. She stared at him. You want to go public as a real couple? Appearances, he corrected. A lunch together. A few photos. Nothing intimate, but enough to shift the headlines. Let them see. Something other than suspicion. And if someone asks why we never had a wedding? He hesitated for a split second. Then we give them one. Alani's breath caught. You're not serious. I am. You want to stage a wedding? I want to protect what I've built. And like it or not, that includes you now. She looked at him. Looked. Past the facade. Past the wealth. To the man who had carved a fortress out of detachment and called it survival. You're doing this because you think it's strategic. I'm doing this, he said, because I won't allow you to become collateral damage in my decision. And in that moment, the room felt smaller, not because of its size, but because of everything that remained unsaid between them. She didn't answer, not with words. She walked over, picked up her planner, and flipped to the next month. Then I suggest you give me a date. For the first time in years, Isaac Murphy let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. It was strange. Planning a wedding meant to be forgotten. Alani sat alone in the boardroom, turned bridal meeting space, flipping through fabric swatches and minimalist flower arrangements, all curated by one of Manhattan's most discreet luxury planners. No fanfare, no press releases, no guest list longer than 10. Just enough to be seen, just enough to silence the questions. Across from her, the planner scribbled notes in a leather-bound journal. We'll go with ivory for the walls, warm candlelight for the aisle, and soft cello instead of a traditional wedding march. Simple, elegant, and fleeting. Alani looked up. Fleeting. The planner's lips curved into a professional smile. Aesthetically. Of course. Of course. This wasn't a beginning. It was a necessary scene in a carefully staged play. Isaac hadn't been involved in a single decision. He said she could do what she wanted, so long as it didn't involve paparazzi or public vows. The ceremony would be held outside the city at a Murphy-owned private estate, one that reporters couldn't access and drones couldn't legally fly over. They would exchange rings again, only this time in front of an audience. No kiss, no honeymoon, just appearances. Alani returned to the penthouse later that night, finding the lights dimmed and Isaac in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, pouring a glass of whiskey. You're home early, he said without looking at her. She placed her bag on the counter. I had to finalize cake options, which felt absurd, considering I won't be eating any of it. Isaac finally turned, his face unreadable as always. You could eat it. No one's stopping you. That's not the point. He poured a second glass and slid it toward her. She ignored it. You said I could plan this however I wanted. You could, so I chose to include something for myself. His brow rose. Which is? A reading. He leaned against the marble counter, glass in hand. A reading? It'll be short, she said. Something honest. Not about love, about dignity, presence. The kind of vows people forget to write when they're too busy trying to be poetic. Isaac studied her. You want to make a statement. I want to make a memory, even if only for me. Silence stretched between them, the kind that hummed louder than any argument. Then he nodded. All right. Have it your way. She stepped back from the counter, unbuttoning her coat. You know, there are moments when I forget this is all fake. His gaze flickered. And then you say something like that. Alani turned away before he could see the expression slip across her face. The morning of the ceremony was muted and gray. A light mist clung to the Hudson Valley, softening the edges of the estate's stone arches and ivy walls. Alani stood in the bridal suite, the silk of her gown whispering against her skin as the final button was secured. Her hair was twisted into a low chignon, and her veil, chosen at the last minute, draped like fog over her shoulders. She looked at herself in the mirror, this version of her, poised, composed, borrowed, and tried to reconcile it with the girl who once stood in line at a free clinic, hoping her mother's prescription hadn't expired. The knock came gently. It wasn't a bridesmaid. It wasn't staff. It was him. Isaac, breaking yet another rule. She opened the door without speaking. He stood in the hallway in his black tuxedo, every line of him sharp and exact. But his expression, something about it was softer tonight. "Shouldn't we wait until the aisle?" she said, her voice low. "Probably." "Then why are you here?" He paused. "Because I wanted to see you before the pretending starts." She blinked, the answer catching her off guard. "And what do you see?" Isaac stepped closer, not touching her, not crowding her, just near enough that the scent of cedar and clean linen reached her. "I see someone I underestimated," he said quietly, "and I don't do that often." A beat passed. "Why now?" "Because you remind me of something I used to believe in. A long time ago." She didn't ask what. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. He stepped back before anything more could pass between them. "I'll see you at the end of the aisle." She nodded. But as the door clicked shut behind him, she leaned against it, heart pounding with something she didn't have a name for. The ceremony lasted 17 minutes. There were fewer than 15 people in the room. Alani walked toward him without music, without a father on her arm, without tradition clinging to her. Only her spine held her upright, perhaps a trace of stubborn pride. Isaac didn't smile, but his eyes didn't leave hers. The officiant began the script, simple, efficient, and when it was time for her to speak, Alani unfolded a small slip of paper. Her voice was calm but steady. "I don't vow to love you. I don't vow forever. But I do vow to stand in the space I occupy, to be seen and to see. I want to walk beside someone who believes in control, even as I fight to keep hold of my own." Isaac didn't blink, but his throat shifted as he swallowed. The officiant cleared his throat. "Mr. Murphy." Isaac paused, then said, "I vow to honor this contract, to keep its boundaries, and to protect what it's built to shield. No kiss, no applause, just rings, hands brushing, eyes meeting, and in the stillness between them, something fragile began to breathe. The ride back to the city was quieter than the ceremony itself. Isaac sat on one side of the sleek black town car, his gaze fixed on the fog-drenched road ahead. Alani sat opposite, hands folded in her lap, and the weight of the wedding band was a new kind of pressure against her skin. Trees slipped by like memories outside the tinted windows, soft, fast, fading. Inside, the silence was neither awkward nor companionable. It was simply waiting. Waiting for someone to break it. Waiting for something to shift. Alani turned toward him finally. "You didn't have to say those words." Isaac's jaw tightened. "They were expected. That wasn't what I meant." He looked at her then, not with deflection or calculation, but with something unguarded for once. "I know," he said. Alani didn't push further. It wasn't the moment. And maybe it never would be. The next day, everything resumed as though nothing monumental had occurred. Emails still flooded her inbox. Coffee is still brewed in the executive lounge. And the city, with its relentless rhythm, pulsed beneath her like always. Only now, she wore a ring. She is only listed in internal HR systems as Mrs. Alani Mary Murphy. Only now, her name triggered automatic flags in the press team's alerts. Isaac didn't make an appearance that morning. It wasn't unusual. He kept irregular hours. But something in her stirred with his absence. A question, not quite concern, not quite curiosity. By noon, she found herself in the penthouse lounge, pretending to organize files. Just in time to overhear Eleanor, his longtime personal assistant, murmuring into the phone. "He hasn't been sleeping again. I told him not to skip the board meeting, but—" Alani knocked softly on the doorframe. Eleanor looked up, startled but composed. "Mrs. Murphy." Alani winced internally at the formality. "You don't have to call me that. I'm still Alani." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "He's in his study. Hasn't left since yesterday evening." "Thank you." She walked the short hallway lined with cold art and colder walls, stopping outside the oak-paneled study. She didn't knock, just opened the door gently. Isaac sat in a leather chair by the fire, not working or speaking, just sitting. Shadows clung to him. His tie was loosened, his shirt slightly rumpled, eyes rimmed with exhaustion he hadn't bothered to conceal. Alani stepped in quietly. "You missed 2 calls and a board meeting. I rescheduled. You never reschedule. I do now." She studied him in the quiet. "Is this about the wedding?" "No." "Then what?" He ran a hand through his hair. "My grandfather passed away this morning." She inhaled softly. "Isaac, I wasn't there." He didn't blink. "He died in his sleep." Peacefully, they said. "And I couldn't get on the plane." Alani walked over, each step measured. She didn't reach for him, didn't touch, just stood near enough to be felt. "You didn't need to explain," she said gently. "But I wanted to." That admission, that quiet, broken vulnerability, unsettled her more than his silence ever had. "I'm sorry," she murmured. He looked at her then, not with gratitude or deflection, but something raw. He was the last person who believed in legacy the way I do. "And now?" Isaac leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Now it's all mine. The company, the control, the weight of it." Alani sat in the chair across from him. "You've always carried weight. You didn't call it that." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "You don't have to stay here tonight. The appearance has been made. You can go home." Alani looked into the fire. "That apartment doesn't feel like home right now." Something shifted in his eyes. A quiet awareness. A recognition. "You can take the guest room," he said. "I wasn't asking for permission." Isaac gave a short, almost breathless laugh. "Of course not." Later, she walked into the guest suite, larger than her entire apartment, and closed the door behind her. She slipped off her shoes, placed her bag on the armchair, and stood still momentarily. The silence wasn't cold here. It was the kind of silence that offered space instead of distance. She drew the curtains back, revealing the night skyline. The city lights flickered like faraway stars, and beneath it all, the hum of life continued, as though nothing had changed. But something had. Not the marriage, not the arrangement. Something smaller, quieter, more dangerous. Something fundamental had begun to take shape somewhere in the hollow space between obligation and pretense. She wasn't sure what it was, or if she wanted it. But it was there, and it was growing. The morning after was wrapped in stillness. Not the tense, awkward kind that followed a mistake, but the unfamiliar, weighted quiet of two people no longer pretending not to feel. Alani stood in the penthouse kitchen, barefoot, wrapped in a soft gray robe Eleanor had left for her. The marble floor was cold against her skin, but she didn't mind. The silence in this space felt different now, less like distance, more like breath held between confessions. She poured herself a cup of coffee. The scent warmed her, reminding her of early mornings in her mother's kitchen before life got too loud. Footsteps approached, slow and even. She didn't turn around. "I thought you didn't drink coffee," came Isaac's voice behind her. She sipped, then said without looking, "I thought you didn't talk before 10. He stepped beside her, reaching for a cup. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled back, the undone that would have looked messy on anyone else. On him, it just looked human. "I didn't sleep," he said. She glanced at him. "Because of your grandfather?" He didn't answer right away. "Partly. And partly because I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday." "The ceremony?" "No," he said, turning to face her. "You." She froze. Not dramatically, just for a breath. But in that breath, something fractured gently beneath her ribs. "I haven't had anyone near me in a long time," he continued, his voice lower now. "Not like this. Not in the quiet." Alani placed her cup down slowly. "And what exactly is this, Isaac?" He didn't speak immediately, but his eyes, those unreadable storm-gray eyes, searched hers with an intensity that made the air between them hum. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but it doesn't feel like anything anymore." The words hovered, fragile as glass. Alani looked down, gathering her breath. "You built this arrangement on control, boundaries, clarity. If we take one step beyond that—" "I know," he cut in gently, "and yet, I still find myself wanting to." She met his gaze again. This man, who had orchestrated a marriage like a business deal, now looked at her like he didn't know what to do with how his heart shifted in her presence. She whispered, "I don't want to be another obligation you mistake for affection, and I don't want to pretend indifference when every part of me notices when you walk into a room." Her breath hitched. It wasn't a love confession. It wasn't a promise. It was an ache named out loud. She stepped past him, careful, slow. The space between them quivered. "If this starts to feel real, Isaac," she said over her shoulder, "you must be prepared for the consequences." His voice followed her like a shadow. "What if I already am?" The rest of the day unfolded like normal. Meetings, deadlines, reports. But nothing felt normal anymore. Not when he brushed past her in the hallway and lingered a second longer than necessary. Not when she caught him watching her during a meeting, his expression unreadable, his fingers tapping against the table like he was holding something back. Even Eleanor, perceptive as always, gave Alani a curious look when she handed over Isaac's schedule. "Everything all right between you two?" she asked, casual on the surface, but laced with subtext. Alani just smiled, vague and unreadable. "We're adjusting." That night, she didn't return to her apartment. And it wasn't because of appearances. It was because of what had been left unsaid in the kitchen, in the air, in the way Isaac's voice had softened without realizing. The storm came at midnight. Heavy rain lashed the tall windows, and thunder cracked the silence like a warning. Alani stood barefoot again at the edge of the penthouse library, wrapped in a blanket, staring out into the storm. She didn't hear him approach. But when she felt his presence behind her, she didn't flinch. He stood quietly, hands in his pockets, eyes following the lightning as it danced across the city skyline. She said softly that storms used to scare me when I was a kid. Why? Because they were loud, unpredictable, like everything could fall apart in an instant. He looked at her profile, the way the light curved against her cheek. And now? She turned toward him. Now I think storms tell the truth too loudly for us to ignore. He stepped closer. Not touching, just near. And in the flicker of lightning, she could see something had shifted in his gaze. Do you want this to stay pretend? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. She didn't know how to, but her hand moved, slowly, carefully, and found his. No declaration, no demand, just warmth, contact, a shared question neither of them could name. And for the first time, Isaac didn't pull away. He just held on. Outside, the city kept breathing. Inside, two people stood on the edge of something fragile and new, where rules once stood, but now only quiet understanding remained. That could be how real love began. Not in fireworks, but in the softest space between fear and faith. Morning came without permission. The storm had passed, but its memory clung to the corners of the penthouse like dew, quiet and persistent. Alani stirred beneath the soft linen sheets, her body warmed by the stillness of the guest room, her thoughts anything but calm. She had slept, though not deeply. Her dreams were tangled with thunder, the pressure of Isaac's hand in hers, and the quiet ache of boundaries beginning to unravel. She hadn't said anything before they parted the night before. Neither had he. They didn't need to. Sometimes, silence said everything. She rose, wrapped herself in a robe, and padded into the kitchen where sunlight spilled through the tall windows. To her surprise, Isaac was already there, shirt sleeves rolled up, hands steady as he cracked 2 eggs into a pan. He didn't look up. You like them scrambled, right? Alani blinked. You're cooking? I've been known to make a passable breakfast. You're a billionaire CEO. He glanced at her then, eyes shadowed by amusement. And yet, I can scramble eggs. Remarkable. She leaned against the counter, arms folded. What's the occasion? No occasion. He stirred slowly. Just a morning that felt different. Alani tilted her head. You mean real? He didn't answer, but the shift in his posture said enough. They sat down to eat at the small kitchen table, an oddly domestic scene, 2 people in quiet companionship, the world outside continuing its rush while they shared something small and unspoken. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. I need to ask you something. Alani looked up. Okay. Do you want to keep living here? The question landed somewhere between casual and careful. She set her cup down. Are you asking me as your assistant or your wife? His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. As a man who no longer wants to draw that line so sharply, I'm asking you. For a moment, Alani couldn't breathe. Not because it was romantic, but because it was honest. I don't want to be a temporary arrangement, she said softly. Not here. Not in your life. Isaac nodded, as if he'd been waiting for that answer. You never were, he replied. The rest of the week unfolded with a strange kind of intimacy. Nothing dramatic. No declarations. Just presence. Alani returned to work, but their eyes met with shared history when she passed Isaac in the hall. When she entered his office, she no longer knocked. And one afternoon, while reviewing contracts, he leaned back and said, Dinner tonight? Not a business dinner, not a meeting, just dinner. They went to a quiet restaurant in the West Village, where no cameras followed, and no one cared who they were. Over candlelight and conversation, something softened between them. Isaac spoke about his mother, distant, cold, polished like glass. Alani spoke about her late father, gentle, tired, always trying to give more than he had. By dessert, they weren't two strangers in a contract. They were two people discovering each other's language. But love, even in its earliest form, is never safe. And the illusion of safety was shattered the next day when Alani opened her inbox to a confidential memo from legal. Subject: Marriage Contract, Clause 7.3.1. Termination and Asset Distribution. She scrolled, the words sharp like blades. Clause 7.3.1. If the marriage becomes publicly compromised or emotionally entangled in ways that could affect the business reputation of Murphy Holdings, Mr. Isaac Murphy reserves the right to terminate the agreement within 30 days, including removal of all housing, financial, and employment arrangements made in connection with said union. Alani stared at the screen. Her breath was shallow, emotionally entangled. That's what this was now. That's what last night had been. Real, tangled, beautiful, dangerous. She heard the footsteps before she saw him. Isaac stood at her office doorway, watching her. His face was unreadable. You saw it. She didn't speak. He said quietly before the wedding that I meant to have that clause removed months ago. But you didn't. No, he admitted. I was afraid I would, because I didn't expect to feel this. Alani stood slowly, her voice low but laced with fire. So you left a clause in our contract that would make it easier to walk away when this started to feel real. Isaac stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I didn't mean for it to be a threat. It was a shield for both of us. She shook her head. You don't protect people by giving yourself an escape route. He stepped closer, not touching her, just standing in her space, like he needed her to see the truth. I'm not escaping, he said. I'm staying. I didn't know how to rewrite. Something I had never imagined wanting to keep. Alani's voice trembled. Then rewrite it now. Not the contract. The way you show up. Their eyes met, storm meeting storm, slowly. Isaac reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. He handed it to her. It was a new draft. No clause, no conditions, no exit. Just two names. A start, a question, a possibility. Alani looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw not the billionaire, not the strategist, but the man who was finally beginning to learn how to stay. The ink on the new draft was still drying when Alani tucked it into her drawer. She hadn't signed it. Not yet. Not because she doubted his intentions, but because her heart had learned to be careful with hope. Hope, in her life, had always arrived dressed as a warning. Isaac hadn't asked for her answer. He had only said, "When you're ready." And then he'd left. No demands, no explanations, just space. He wasn't pushing or calculating for the first time since their story began. He was waiting. That evening, Alani sat by the guest room window, watching the Manhattan skyline bleed from gold to navy. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper he'd given her. No clauses, no fine print. Just a single sentence at the bottom, handwritten in ink, the color of smoke. If this becomes real, let's build it without fear. I am. She closed her eyes. The risk wasn't the document. It was the emotions swelling in her chest every time he entered a room. The silence between them no longer felt like avoidance, but comfort. The way she had started to imagine staying. 2 days passed before they found themselves alone again. Not by accident, not by arrangement. Just life, gently guiding them toward the inevitable. It was late when she returned to the penthouse. The city below pulsed in amber and steel. the distant hum of taxis rising like a heartbeat. She hadn't told him she'd be back, but as she opened the door, she found him on the sofa, sleeves rolled up, glasses at the edge of his nose, poring over a book that looked too worn to be corporate. He looked up. His expression didn't change, but his breath caught, just slightly. "I thought you'd gone home," he said. "I was on my way. Then I wasn't." She set her bag down. The air between them carried weight, but not tension. Like something was waiting to unfold. He closed the book gently. "I made dinner. There's enough for two." She hesitated. "Did you expect me?" "No," Isaac said. "But I hoped." That one word, hoped, softened something inside her. They ate quietly. Pasta and wine. Laughter is low and intimate. He reached to tuck a loose curl behind her ear at one point, and the contact lingered longer than it should have. Afterward, they sat on the terrace, overlooking the glittering city. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly. He didn't need to ask what it was. The contract? How did this start? Isaac exhaled slowly. "I regret how I tried to keep it distant. I regret assuming you'd never become anything more than convenient." Alani turned toward him. "And now?" "Now you're the one thing I didn't predict in my life," he said, voice steady. "And the only one I don't want to lose." She looked away, emotions cresting dangerously close to the surface. "Do you know how many times I've been someone else's afterthought?" Isaac reached for her hand, not with urgency, but reverence. "You've never been an afterthought to me, Alani. You were a mirror, and mirrors don't lie." Tears burned the backs of her eyes. Not sadness, not joy. Just release. He leaned closer. Their foreheads touched, breath mingling in the warm hush of the night. "If we do this," she whispered, "I don't want a version of you. I like the man who made scrambled eggs and sat with grief like it was sacred." He closed his eyes. "Then that's the man I'll be." The next morning, the paper was gone from her drawer. She'd placed it on his desk, signed in her careful looping script. Alani Mary. No conditions, no hesitations. But it wasn't a marriage contract anymore. It was the beginning of something messier, something real. Later that day, news leaked. Not from them. Someone in the legal department had spotted the amended document, sent it up the chain, and suddenly, the press was ablaze. Isaac Murphy's marriage. No longer a contract. CEO's arranged bride may be here to stay. Alani Mary, from temp assistant to permanent partner. The calls flooded in. Eleanor stood outside Isaac's office, holding 3 cell phones and looking mildly amused. "They're going to want a statement," she said. Isaac didn't flinch. "Schedule an interview. Prime time. 1 camera. No edits." Alani stepped into the doorway. "Are you sure you're ready to go public with this?" He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "No, but I'm sure I don't want to keep hiding it." She gave a slight nod. "Then let's tell them the truth." He arched a brow. "Which is?" "That love isn't always planned." She turned, walking away. Isaac watched her, a slow smile breaking across his usually impenetrable face. And for the first time since he inherited everything, Isaac Murphy realized that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost control. Maybe he'd finally found something worth surrendering to. The lights in the studio were too bright. Alani blinked against the heat as the makeup artist patted a final dust of translucent powder across her cheekbones. Somewhere behind her, producers murmured last-minute instructions into earpieces. The studio buzzed with attention that wasn't hers, but she felt it anyway. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not in a seat meant for wives chosen with care, intention, love. Not as a footnote to a contract rewritten too late. Isaac entered moments before the broadcast. He looked calm, his expression carved from quiet confidence. But Alani had learned to read between the lines. The subtle flex of his jaw, the way he adjusted his cufflinks more than necessary. He was nervous too. And that meant something. They didn't speak before sitting side by side. The host, a polished woman in her 40s with a warm smile and eyes that missed nothing, greeted them gently before the countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on. "Good evening," the host began, voice smooth as velvet. "Tonight, we have an exclusive conversation with Isaac Murphy, CEO of Murphy Holdings, and his wife, Alani Mary Murphy, who have, until now, kept their personal lives very private. But today, we speak not about business or scandal, but something far more complicated, and perhaps more human." Alani inhaled slowly. "I'll start with the question everyone's asking," the host said gently. "Your marriage began as a contract, a business arrangement. Do you regret it?" Isaac leaned slightly forward. "I regret the distance I tried to put between myself and something that now feels real. But no, I don't regret meeting Alani. Not then, not now." The host turned to Alani. "And you?" She didn't rush her answer. She never did. "I don't regret saying yes," she said softly. "Even if the reasons weren't romantic initially, I regret that I silenced my instincts because I thought I didn't belong beside him." There was a pause, a hush that felt sacred. The host smiled. "So what changed?" Alani turned to Isaac. Their eyes met. "I did," he said before she could answer, "because she changed me." That wasn't rehearsed. She saw it in the way he looked at her. Not like a partner in a deal, but like something tender had taken root in places he thought were long closed off. The interview continued with softer questions about their first impressions, differences, and lives before the arrangement. At one point, the host asked, "Alani, did you ever feel invisible in his world?" Alani paused. "I felt invisible long before I met Isaac. That wasn't his fault. That was the world's design. But in his presence, I learned that I didn't have to make myself small to survive." A hush spread across the studio. The host leaned forward. "So, where do you go from here? As a couple?" Isaac took Alani's hand gently. The cameras zoomed in, but for once, the moment didn't feel performed. "We stop pretending we're temporary," he said, "and we start building like we want to last." The interview aired that night. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. "She speaks like poetry. I've never seen Isaac look like that. Protect this couple at all costs." Alani watched none of it. Instead, she sat on the terrace with a glass of wine and the city stretching endlessly below her. Isaac joined her later, wordless, the quiet of the evening wrapping around them like a promise. "They loved you," he said, setting down 2 glasses. She looked at him. "They don't know me." "I'm starting to," he murmured, "and I want to know more." She didn't smile, but her shoulders softened. "Then stop waiting for permission." He reached for her hand and pulled her gently into his lap. She didn't resist. "You asked me once," she said against his collar, "what this could become." He remembered. Every word, every silence between them. "I think," she whispered, "we're no longer becoming anything. We're already something." He kissed her temple. Not with hunger, not with possession, but with reverence. Later that week, a bouquet of wildflowers arrived at her old apartment. No card, just a hand-scrawled note. For the woman who made the silence feel like home. She didn't need more. She packed the last of her things and closed the door behind her. Not just in the apartment. On the girl who had once believed love was for other people. Back at the penthouse, Isaac was waiting. Not like a man who'd won, but like someone who understood that love was not earned by wealth or charm, but by showing up. Again, and again, and again. Alani placed the key on the marble counter. "I don't need this anymore," she said. Isaac frowned slightly. "Why?" She leaned in, her voice velvet and firm. "Because home doesn't need a lock when I know I belong." It was strange how ordinary life resumed after a revelation, as if the world had politely nodded at their love and continued spinning, unbothered. But beneath the polished routines, board meetings, press statements, investor calls, something subtle shifted in Isaac. He smiled more, not the polite, professional kind, but quiet, off-guard moments, when Alani hummed while brushing her hair, argued with the GPS from the passenger seat, and laughed at a joke only she found funny. And Alani? She began to live as if she didn't owe anyone an apology for being seen. She chose bold colors again, reds, coppers, greens that didn't shrink into the corporate palette. She stopped bracing herself in rooms where she used to feel invisible. But with all growth came discomfort. It started with a simple question from Isaac's mother. The invitation arrived handwritten, stamped with the family crest. Sunday, brunch. Family only. Isaac read it twice before setting it down. He murmured that she never includes family only, unless she wants to exclude someone. Alani folded laundry at the edge of the bed, her movements steady. "You think I'm not welcome." "I think," he said, voice tight. "She believes our marriage is still an inconvenience she's waiting to fix." Alani didn't flinch. "Then let's go." Isaac blinked. "You're sure?" She smiled, slow and unbothered. "If she expects me to be intimidated, let's not give her the satisfaction." The Caldwell estate in Connecticut was everything old money believed in. Columns, hedges trimmed within an inch of perfection. A silence that hummed with unspoken rules. Alani stepped out of the car in a deep emerald dress, her skin luminous against the morning light. Inside, the dining room buzzed with carefully measured greetings and gold cutlery. Isaac's mother, Camilla, was poised at the head of the table, flawless, detached, and exacting. "Alani," she said with a nod, "you look unexpected." "Thank you," Alani replied. That was the intention. The brunch unfolded like a chess match. Camilla spoke in passive-aggressive compliments. Alani responded with grace, each word balanced and deliberate. Isaac sat tense beside her, his hand resting against her knee beneath the table like an anchor. Then came the question that silenced the clinking of silverware. "So, Alani," Camilla said, folding her napkin with surgical precision, "now that your situation has become public, have you considered what your legacy might look like? After all, you've married into a name that carries weight." Alani placed her fork down gently. "My legacy has never depended on a last name. I built my worth long before anyone attached a title to it." The silence rippled. And then, from the far end of the table, Isaac's aunt murmured. "Well said." Camilla blinked, momentarily unseated. Later, as they walked through the estate garden, Isaac turned to her. "You didn't just hold your ground," he said. "You planted something." Alani chuckled. "You're being poetic again." He stopped walking. "No, I'm being honest." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I used to think legacy meant empire. Now, it might mean the courage to love someone publicly. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing affectionately. Are you saying I'm your legacy? He nodded. You, and whatever we build beyond this. But the next morning, the world reminded them that love was never safe from scrutiny. A headline flashed across Isaac's office screen. Alani Mary's past unravels, from debt to diamonds. The article dragged out an old credit dispute from years ago, back when Alani had dropped out of school temporarily to care for her aunt, when medical bills had eaten through her savings. It wasn't scandalous, but it wasn't kind in its precision. Isaac's jaw clenched. I'll sue. Alani read the article in silence. No, she said quietly. You'll let me respond. He looked at her. Are you sure? She nodded. I've hidden enough of myself. Let them see the whole picture. That night, she posted on her account, a platform she'd barely used. No PR spin, no glamour. Just a photo of her holding her aunt's hand in the hospital 5 years ago. And below it, a caption. Before the diamonds, there were nights I didn't know how we'd eat. Before the penthouse, there were buses I took to jobs for which no one thanked me. I am not ashamed of who I was. I survived her, and I bring her with me. Within hours, the post went viral. Comments flooded in, some cruel, most reverent. One read, "Thank you for not erasing the struggle." Isaac found her curled on the couch, eyes glassy but calm. He didn't say anything, just knelt, resting his forehead against her knees. I hate that the world touches you like this, he whispered. She stroked his hair, but I'd rather be touched than erased. He looked up. You're more than I ever deserved. She cupped his face, thumb brushing along his jaw. No, you're exactly what I needed to know. I didn't have to walk alone anymore. And in that soft, breakable moment, the cracks they had each carried finally let the light in. Together. The days that followed were oddly quiet. Not in the world outside. Social media still buzzed with commentary. Headlines speculated, and press releases circulated like wind. But inside the penthouse, inside the fragile space Isaac and Alani had begun to build, there was stillness. Stillness that didn't feel like silence. Stillness that felt like breath. They no longer moved around each other like occupants of the same contract. Their rhythms began to sync in unspoken ways. He knew she liked her coffee with cinnamon. She knew he hummed under his breath when he was deep in thought. The intimacy wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. One evening, Alani found herself in the music room, a forgotten corner of Isaac's home she'd never entered. Dust clung to the baby grand piano's edges like time had stalled there. She sat on the bench without playing, her fingers tracing the keys without sound. You play? His voice drifted in like a memory. She didn't turn. I used to when I was a girl. Before bills, before survival replaced sound. He stepped beside her. Play for me now. I'm out of practice. I don't care. Alani hesitated, then let her fingers fall on the keys. The first notes were tentative, like a voice learning to speak again. Then, slowly, the melody took shape. Soft, melancholy, unfinished. Isaac stood there, watching her. Not because she was performing, but because she was revealing something that didn't need to be explained. When she finished, she didn't look at him. I forgot I still had music in me. He knelt beside her. You have so much more than that in you. And in the hush that followed, he rested his head against her thigh, like a man seeking refuge in the most unremarkable kind of closeness. The next day brought a different kind of storm. It began with a knock on the boardroom door. Eleanor, always poised, always exact, entered without waiting for permission. "There's been a motion," she said. "A call for a vote among the shareholders. They want to reassess your position as CEO." Isaac stiffened. "On what grounds?" She handed him a file. "They're calling it reputational instability." He flipped through the papers. Alani's name was mentioned more than his. A hollow formed in his chest. Not fear, not even anger, just a deep ache. He looked up. "They think I'm weaker because I chose to live like a human being." Eleanor nodded once. "They think love is a liability." Isaac stood, jaw tight. "Then let's show them what strength looks like." That night, he came home late. Alani was on the couch, a book resting on her lap, her eyes distant. She looked up when she heard the door. "You saw it?" he asked. She nodded. "Your assistant called. She wanted me to know before it went public." Isaac sank onto the couch beside her, silent for a long beat. Then he whispered, "I don't want you to blame yourself." "I don't," she said. "But I'm not naive either. I know what I represent to them." "You represent everything they're afraid of," he said. "A woman who doesn't need permission. A woman who doesn't apologize for being powerful in her own right." Alani met his gaze, firm and steady. "And are you willing to lose it all for that woman?" Without hesitation, he answered, "Yes." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more profound. A choice. A vow. 2 days later, Isaac walked into the boardroom, not as a CEO desperate to defend his title, but as a man with nothing left to prove. Alani stood outside the room, waiting, not because she needed to be there, but because she had earned the right to be seen standing beside him, not behind. The vote was swift, tense, brutal. But when it was over, Isaac emerged, his tie loosened, his posture relaxed. He looked at her and nodded. "They tried," he said, "but I'm still here." She exhaled. "Because of what you've built?" He shook his head. "Because of who I've become." Later that evening, they stood on the rooftop, the skyline glowing like something alive. The air between them pulsed with everything unspoken. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked quietly. He stepped closer, only to say, "It took me this long to see you. And now?" He cupped her face gently. "Now, I see everything, and I still choose you." Her voice trembled. "Even if I come with fire?" He smiled, then let it burn. "I've lived in rooms that were too cold for too long." And when he kissed her, it wasn't out of possession, hunger, or need. It was out of gratitude, reverence. The kind of kiss that says, "I've seen every version of you, and I still want more." The type of kiss that happens once the noise fades, and only the truth remains. The air shifted before the rain fell. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle heaviness that rolled through Manhattan like a sigh long held. The kind of rain that doesn't announce itself with thunder, but arrives softly, steadily, as if the sky had been holding something in for too long. Alani stood by the window of Isaac's office, her arms folded gently across her waist. Outside, raindrops streaked down the glass in uneven lines, painting the city in blurred silhouettes. "It's finally raining," she murmured. Isaac looked up from his desk. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just a pale blue dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, the top button undone. The stormlight made him look softer than usual, younger somehow. "You've been waiting for it," he said. She nodded. "Rain reminds me that everything passes, even drought, even pressure, even..." He crossed the room, standing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "Did you ever think it would be like this?" she asked. Isaac didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the raindrops slide down the pane, as if searching for something in the water. No, he finally said. But I've stopped wishing for anything different. She turned to him, eyes unreadable. Even with the scrutiny? The risk of losing your company? Your reputation? I've rebuilt empires, he said quietly. But I've only ever had one chance to build something tangible. With you. Her breath caught, not because of the words, but because he meant them. Fully, without armor. That night, the storm deepened. Rain lashed against the penthouse windows, thunder rumbling low like the city's tired heart. Alani couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of their bed, wrapped in a silk robe, feet bare against the cold hardwood floor. She stared into the dark. Not out of fear, but memory. She remembered being 15, curled up on the couch with her aunt as the rain flooded their basement apartment. Her aunt had told her, "Let the storm come, baby. Let it wash away what you don't need to carry." And maybe she was ready to let go. Isaac stirred behind her. She didn't turn. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said softly. He sat up, voice husky from sleep. "You didn't. I just noticed the quiet got too quiet." She smiled faintly. "It's strange. The closer I get to peace, the more I remember the noise I lived through." Isaac slid out of bed and joined her on the floor, his back against the wall, his knees drawn up. "You don't have to outrun it anymore," he said. "It's not chasing you." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Maybe. But sometimes I still feel like that girl with wet shoes and unpaid bills. She never really leaves me." He reached for her hand, then let her sit beside us. Let her see what she made possible. Alani didn't speak. She let the storm talk for her. In the days that followed, their world calmed. The media frenzy cooled. The board drama dissolved, partly thanks to Eleanor's ruthless diplomacy and Isaac's unexpected refusal to retaliate. He held meetings with a new sense of presence. Less performance, more substance. People noticed. Not because he was louder, but because he was finally rooted. Alani, meanwhile, began sketching again. Not fashion, no plans, just shapes, emotions, lines that told stories only she understood. She didn't need them to be understood anymore. She just needed them to be hers. On a Thursday afternoon, Isaac returned home early. He found her in the kitchen, barefoot, hair tied up, humming a Nina Simone tune under her breath. He didn't interrupt, just leaned against the doorframe, watching. She caught him eventually. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, not pausing her chopping. "Because this is what I used to think didn't exist," he said. She arched an eyebrow. "What? Women who can cook?" He laughed, low and warm. "No, quiet joy. Moments that don't need fixing." She smiled, then paused. "You know I'm still scared sometimes, right?" "I know," he said. "Me too. But you never show it." "Neither do you," he replied, "except when you're with me." She looked at him then, really looked. The way his guard only dropped when he was with her. The way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for her waist. The way he still asked, silently, if he was allowed to love her this way. And maybe that was the most incredible intimacy, loving someone who knew how to carry your fear without fixing it. That night, she kissed him first. Not because he hadn't kissed her before, but because she wasn't waiting to be chosen this time. She chose him, with open eyes, steady hands, and softness that only comes after surviving yourself. They didn't speak afterward. Didn't need to. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city exhaled beneath a sky still heavy with clouds, but no longer threatening. Isaac brushed a curl from her cheek, his thumb lingering against her skin. "Was it everything you hoped for?" he asked, voice low. "No," she whispered. "It was better because it was real." That may be the point. Love wasn't the absence of storms. It was finding someone who stayed when the rain finally came. Spring arrived in New York without ceremony. The cherry blossoms in Central Park unfurled like secrets too long kept, and the wind no longer bit. It kissed. The city moved as it always had, hurried, unsentimental. But for Alani and Isaac, something had slowed. It wasn't the kind of stillness that came from stagnation, but the kind that followed peace and earned peace. They stood together in the courtyard of the Brooklyn brownstone they'd bought quietly. No press release, no ribbon cutting. Just them, hands interlocked, as the realtor handed them the keys. Alani glanced around the overgrown garden. "It's nothing like the penthouse." Isaac smiled. "That's the point." There was ivy on the back fence, stubborn weeds between the bricks, and a tree growing too close to the garage. But it felt like something alive, something they could shape together. She leaned into him. "We're doing this, aren't we?" He kissed her temple. "We already did." The wedding came later. Simple. Sunset. A rooftop, not a ballroom. She wore a satin slip dress in pearl, her hair loose and coiled like midnight. He wore no tie, no pocket square, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a boutonniere she'd picked herself. There were no headlines, no magazines, just the people who mattered. Eleanor cried silently behind a pair of vintage sunglasses. Isaac's mother stood beside her, arms crossed tightly. But when Alani walked down the aisle, Camilla's hand found Eleanor's, and she didn't let go. Alani's vows weren't written. She looked Isaac in the eyes, steady and unshaken. "I used to think love had to be earned with pain," she said. "I had to prove that I was worth staying for. But then you showed up, flawed and human, and stayed anyway. Not because I made it easy, but because I made it real." He blinked back something tender, and when he spoke, his voice trembled just enough to break the room's composure. "I used to think power meant control. Now I know it means choosing you, over legacy, over fear, over ego, every day." Later that night, they danced alone on the rooftop. The guests had gone. The music had faded. But they stayed, swaying barefoot under string lights, laughter soft between kisses. Alani rested her cheek against his chest. "So what now, Mr. Murphy?" He pulled her closer. "Now, we live. Now, we build." They didn't need a map. They had survived the press, the boardrooms, the ghosts of who they used to be. They had faced each other in every version, angry, afraid, undone, and still chose to stay. That was the real empire, not the company, not the wealth. But no one clapped for the quiet moments, the mornings with mismatched mugs. The laundry was folded together, the shared silence at the piano, the storm weathered with joined hands. Months later, Alani sat in the backyard of their brownstone, sketching on a warm spring afternoon. Isaac was somewhere inside, probably burning toast or trying to fix the kitchen faucet without success. She felt the first flutter in her belly, soft, almost like a hiccup beneath her skin. She placed a hand there, stilled. Not fear, not a surprise, just awe. She smiled, slow and knowing. Later, when Isaac came out with a crooked grin and a smear of flour on his cheek, she reached for his hand. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. He froze, reading her eyes before her words. "You're..." She nodded. We're not just building a life anymore. We're creating one. His breath caught. He crouched before her, resting his forehead against her stomach, laughter breaking through like sunlight. You, he whispered. You are my whole beginning. She ran her fingers through his hair. And you are the proof that even broken things can bloom. Love wasn't what saved them. They saved themselves through honesty, patience, risk, and the willingness to rewrite everything they thought they knew. But love was the reward. Not loud, not flawless, just true. And in a world too quick to judge, too fast to forget, Isaac and Alani built something no one could tear down. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. If this story touched your heart, let it live on by hitting like, dropping a comment about your favorite moment, and following the channel for more emotional, unforgettable love stories. Sometimes, the best fairy tales don't begin with once upon a time, but with a quiet elevator ride and a woman who refused to shrink.